They say the boy showed up at the gates of a new clinic, shoeless, unaccompanied, whispering in perfect Latin. No one knew where he came from. No birth certificate, no family to claim him. But when asked his name, he answered clearly Elias, a name that would appear again and again in locked files and letters sent decades after the clinic burned down. Welcome to Sleepy History Tales. Tonight, we'll reopen a never-before-seen file that chronicles a final experiment in 1892 Prussia, a forgotten asylum. A doctor who disappeared, and a boy whose mind was shattered in ways that science has yet to explain. Over the next hour, you'll hear the most chilling story ever told in the history of neurology. Doctors' notes, sealed records, and scraps of documents found in a clinic that no longer exists. This is not fiction. Before we begin, I want to ask you, where are you watching? What time is it? Leave a comment, because some people say this story not only stays in your head, but stays with you all night. You'll meet Dr. Karl Brenner, a surgeon obsessed with brain splitting who attempted something no ethics committee could approve. He tried to split the consciousness of a living child and little Elias. His mind began to split into two distinct selves, one cold and calculating, the other fanatical and volatile. They didn't sleep at the same time, wrote letters to each other, and even mapped tunnels under the clinic that no blueprint had ever documented. There are records, and there are records that no one is allowed to find. Lines that change, strokes, mid-sentence notes that appear in sealed files long after the author has passed away. So you wonder, if you split a soul, can both halves coexist? Or does something else come through that crack? Stay with me, the surgery will begin soon. And remember, not all patients enter the hospital through the main door. Some have been inside for a long time. You see, the records of the boy Elias are very reserved, as if the writer were afraid to touch on something too terrible to say aloud. Each observation is very careful, but gradually reveals a strange and incomprehensible logic. No one knows where he came from, who his parents are, nor does he have any papers. The only thing that is clear, he appears barefoot, mumbles Latin, and does not move when touched. Elias does not speak unless asked, and when he does, sometimes he does not answer in the language used to ask questions. Physically, apart from two symmetrical scars on the back of his head, which have almost healed, there are no other injuries. But the strange thing is that when he looks in the mirror, he does not recognize himself. And then, in the following days, the records record incredible changes. Every day he speaks, clearly translates Latin, fluently draws delicate anatomical diagrams. The next day, he became withdrawn, irritable, tearing up papers and speaking in short, unconnected sentences. He was like two different people, unaware of each other's existence. Doctors began to notice the distinct preferences of the two egos. One ate only porridge, the other demanded eggs boiled for exactly 7 minutes. One signed his notes, Elias. The other Lucas, but the boy would not acknowledge either name. And here's the real haunting point. In the margins of the records, there were notes referring to medical procedures that were not made public. A term kept repeating, interhemispheric interruption. A drawing of the corpus callosum was not an anatomical label, but behavioral states, denial, confession, judgment, desire. The language from then on was not just descriptive, but also intentional. There was a chillingly brief note: corpus callosum has been cut. But the boy sang. He lived. What gradually emerged was not illness, but a plan. Elias was not a child saved or abandoned, but a child delivered, chosen, prepared by whom to this day remains a mystery. A single surviving telegram from Königsberg mentions a splitting experiment and the dissociation of the patient's hemispheres. The telegram was unsigned. There were no surgical records, no medical team, no records of post-operative follow-up. And then, among the charred papers of the Eastern Clinic, small signs emerged: slight changes in motor skills, asymmetrical responses to visual stimuli, and a note stating that the boy had become ambidextrous. Other strange behavior was recorded. Elias woke up and asked what day it was, then replied, "Then I am someone you have not met." His handwriting split into two, one smooth and graceful, the other hard and angular. When asked which letter was his, he replied, "Neither." And finally, a small but haunting interlude: a nurse at a nearby nursing home recalled a boy admitted in 1899. A child with partial amnesia, no one knew where he came from, but who loved geometric puzzles. When asked where he came from, he replied, "From the quiet half." The new house clinic burned down in the fall of 1892, with no mention in the local newspapers, no official death toll. Of the last 21 patients, not a single one was ever found. The only name left was that of the attending physician, who was presumed to have died of nervous exhaustion. No grave, no body. The file may not have provided answers, but it left something more persistent than certainty. A feeling of unease echoing between the lines, silent and persistent. Do you feel the chill? The boy was found standing barefoot outside the south gate of the clinic near dawn, when it was cold enough to freeze the oil in the lamps. His feet left no tracks in the snow. The road from Wordorf had been untraveled for days, and the carriage was not due until the following evening. But he stood there motionless, hands clasped before his chest, reciting a line from Cicero in perfect Latin. When the gatekeeper approached, Elias did not blink his eyes, fixed on the iron hinges of the door, his posture as solemn as a statue. He wore a thin, ankle-length coat, the kind worn by the poor, but the collar was so finely tailored that it could not have been second-hand. The cloth was stiff with salt, and there was a faint smell of evaporated seawater, although there was no sea nearby. When asked his name, he did not answer, but only repeated the same sentence, his tone too precise to be accidental. There was no sign of frostbite, fatigue, or injury, and he did not blink until the gate was unlocked. What do you think of this mysterious boy? If you were the gatekeeper, would you dare to step closer? Comment and let me know. When Elias walked through the examination room door, there was no sound, no hesitation or fear, just absolute silence, as if he were not a first-time visitor, but rather a homecoming. His eyes were fixed on the tile floor, stopping at the intersection of two tiles where a crack formed the shape of a cross. A nurse recalled that moment as if the boy were confirming something very important. When spoken to in standard German, he responded in an archaic dialect. Switching to Polish, he reverted to Latin. The answers were short, decisive, without any confusion. He refused milk, asking only for water from a pitcher of ice, and placed the examination room chair exactly 2 inches to the left of its original position. No apparent reason, no explanation. An initial neurological examination found nothing unusual. Reflexes were normal, pupils were even and responsive, but there was something very elusive about his eyes. Blinks were unusually long, and his eyes did not follow the same direction when looking at moving objects. When a light was shined on his left eye, a slight movement in his cheekbone appeared, lasting even after the light was turned off. Not a sign of pain, but confusing to the observer. When asked to draw a human hand with his right hand, he produced an anatomically accurate drawing, which left the medical staff in awe. But when he switched to his left hand, the drawing became freer, expressive, almost a mirror image, with more decisive, powerful strokes. When asked which drawing he liked better, he replied, "Neither of mine." 2 parallel scars were discovered while he was bathing, located near the border of his head, each more than 3 cm long, healed without infection. When asked about them, he would just gently stroke the scars and say, "The light has left." Sleep came naturally without the need for sedatives. His arms were folded across his chest, like the embalming position that no one had taught him. He did not stir all night, and the sheets were not wrinkled. In the morning, he repeated the familiar question, "What day is it?" and nodded after being answered as if he were classifying himself into some category. A nurse on the morning shift reported that on the 3rd morning, the boy said something strange, "I am someone you have never met." But his language was inconsistent sometimes, formal, even poetic other times, curt and indifferent. On the 3rd day, when placed before the mirror, he did not recognize himself. Instead, he tilted his head and asked, "Does the mirror know who it belongs to?" When reminded that it was his face, he fell silent, staring until his breath fogged the mirror, the image disappearing. Elias's handwriting also showed a clear split. One was a thin, right slanting type with curves and closed loops. The other was rough left slanting with uneven pressure and wide spacing. The 2 signatures were in the same position but completely different in style and confidence. The handwriting analyst said one handwriting belonged to a left-handed person, the other to a right-handed person. All were written in the same hour with no sign of awareness of the difference. His eating habits were also split. One day, he ate only porridge. Another day, he insisted on eggs boiled for exactly 7 minutes and would refuse anything else. He could not remember what he had chosen the day before. What was strange was not only his eccentricity, but his clear inner division. By the end of the 1st week, he had moved the furniture in his room 3 times each time, in a different geometric arrangement. But each time he returned to the same position he had been in when he was admitted. When asked, he denied moving anything. Staff found him marking spots on the floor with tiny pencil dots behind the legs of the furniture. The furniture kept moving, and he still denied it. During one observation, the nurse saw him sitting upright in bed, eyes open, smiling slightly. When she approached, the left side of his face twitched twice, but the right side remained still. What do you think is Elias really? 2 people? Or is there a bigger mystery waiting to be discovered? If you found this part interesting, comment and let me know. Where you want to hear the story? Continue. The boy's smile never widened. It was fixed, half-formed like an inseparable mask. When he finally turned his head, both eyes were open, but only one followed the nurse's movements. The other was blank, indifferent. There was no record of Elias in any church, school, or administrative office within 200 kilometers. In fact, notices had been sent to every orphanage, hospital, and nursing home. From Breslau to Königsberg, no one recognized the boy. Not a single child had been reported missing, and not a single guardian had appeared. It was as if Elias had stepped out of the pages of a book that had never been written. When asked where he had come from, Elias replied simply, "I have returned." Not back, but back as if he were simply continuing a journey that had been suspended. The next night, as darkness fell, his eyes twitched again at the dawn. Elias's name disappeared from all surgical records after 1893. There was no record of him in hospital meetings or in the alumni lists of the H. Heidelberg School of Medicine. There was no obituary, no grave, no farewell letter. The historical trail ended with a white envelope returned, never opened, with only a red seal on it. But there was another important person, the doctor in charge, who had run the private surgical department of the Newhouse Clinic for 5 years with absolute power, although no one knew who he was. His appointment had been arranged through secret correspondence, funded by anonymous benefactors. When he arrived in 1887, the surgical department had been closed for more than 5 years, with dusty instruments, a musty smell, and a sense of death. He reopened the surgery alone. His colleagues, if he could be called, that described him as thin and coldly precise. He maintained rigid routines, walking down the hallway at the exact minute. Each morning, his gloved hands folded behind his back. He ate alone, refusing alcohol and sunlight. His windows were always locked, summer or winter, and the curtains never moved. The cleaning staff remembers the smell of turpentine and burning paper, lingering on the walls of his office even though there was no fire. His surgical drawings were also unusual. Instead of drawing the usual anatomical structures, he marked the hemispheres of the brain according to mental functions, zoning them with words like judgment, cruelty, reverence, rejection. He did not mention blood vessels or fissures, but wrote only phrases describing behavior and will. He had studied under respected masters and even corresponded with the scientist Grazio, though he received no reply. While others were studying language, memory, or cognition, he was going down a darker path. He believed that the corpus callosum was not a bridge, but a chain that bound the mind to a single whole, a forced compromise. If that tie was severed, the different parts of the soul would be freed, no longer repressed. His notes are scattered in handwritten margins, discarded telegrams, and personal diaries not intended for outside eyes. A notable note: the moral dichotomy is not an internal conflict, but a structural coexistence. The mind is not one voice, but two stitched together in silence. Empathy and cruelty are neighbors forced to cooperate simply by brain architecture. Those who worked under him did not last long. An assistant left in 1890, saying only that it was because of ethical conflicts. An attendant disappeared without a trace. He was heard saying that he had often passed the operating room at night and seen the shadow of a child sitting under a lamp, speaking in two voices, one high, panicked, the other slow, deliberate. No one dared to complain. No investigation was ever carried out. He rarely spoke of his personal life. A single letter mentions the death of his daughter at the age of 9 from typhoid before he took up the job there. The daughter's name appears again in the corner of a drawing of a brain, cut in half with the words She has not forgotten me. The left side remembers. Later, in a locked drawer of his desk, a wax-sealed glass vial containing 3 strands of blonde hair in ethanol was found, labeled with his daughter's name with her initials Clara L. What do you think of this mysterious doctor? Was personal suffering the driving force behind his horrific experiment? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you like me to continue with the next part? Let me know. No one knew what the L in Clara L stood for. A nurse once said that the doctor often asked strange questions when no one was around. He once asked if the memories stored in the left hand could be accessed by the right. When the nurse hesitated, thinking it was a rhetorical question, he did not elaborate, just waited quietly. The surgical logs became less formal over time. The terminology was blurred, confused. At first, it still looked like legal medical records, though highly coded. But later notes took on a haunting, poetic quality. An opening line made the reader shudder. To awaken a silent brother, the blade must speak with warmth, not cold steel. The preparations became increasingly elaborate. Patients were placed in alternating cycles one day of language, the next day of sensory play. A logbook with 2 columns, Laga, the formation and die watcher, the observer. The goal is not to heal but to split, to create a mind with 2 masters, each unaware of the other's intentions. He believed that the soul, if it existed, did not reside in unity. The truth of the self could only be seen in separation. God created man, and his half-reflections, calling that debate consciousness. At the end of one diary, the last line fades like space disappearing. I have performed a separation, but I may have dug deeper. The soul is not divided. It has risen. The writing is broken. The next page is scorched in one corner. There are no further notes in the notebook. No one saw him leave. 3 weeks later, a fire burned down the east wing of the institute. No body was found. No one claimed the surgical instruments. The folded blouse lay at the foot of his bed, unburned. Beneath it, a pencil sketch. A boy standing between 2 doors, one marked, "Speak," the other, "Listen." The boy had no mouth. Every morning, Elias forgot everything he had said the night before. At first, everyone thought it was just fatigue, a harmless mistake from confinement. But the memory loss became more precise. Conversations from the night disappeared from memory by morning. The previous day's chores had to be retaught. His carefully written notes became suspicious, as if someone had put them in his room. The medical staff began keeping 2 separate sets of notes, one for the day, one for the night. What emerged was not a change of mood, but a shift of presence. During the day, Elias was a calm, orderly boy, fluent in speech, demanding Latin books, drawing anatomical diagrams with unusual confidence, and always folding his bed. But when night fell, he became a different person, stubborn, avoiding contact, speaking only when forced with short, mysterious, or rude words. The bed sheets were no longer folded, but were askew or torn. Paintings appeared on the walls, some abstract, some strangely symmetrical. A night nurse once saw the boy hiding under the bed, using charcoal to draw overlapping circles containing unfamiliar characters. When asked what they meant, he would simply say, "The other person left them." The handwriting of the day and night was in marked contrast. The day's strokes were soft and curvy. The night's were stiff and sloppy. The angle of the pages was also different. A handwriting analyst confirmed that one set belonged to a right-handed person, the other to a left-handed person. The ink was slightly different, indicating that they were written at different times. When asked who wrote it, Elias denied both. A clear pattern emerged. On even days, he was logical, orderly, and cool. On odd days, impulsive, unpredictable, and silent. The two personalities were completely unaware of each other's existence. When asked about his actions or words in the other state, he would simply smile or look bewildered as if it were an elaborate joke. Dreams became the key to understanding this enigmatic man. He recounted the dream every morning, and it never overlapped. In one dream, he wandered through a rock garden where people stood motionless, as if awaiting orders. In another, he was in an empty library. No books, just empty shelves plunged into darkness, searching for something that had never been written. But at night, he became increasingly reluctant to talk about the dream, even turning his face to the wall when asked. A nurse even heard him mumbling in his sleep, not in a human voice, but in a strange language, steady rhythmic, like a chant. Once she heard a peculiar humming sound, 2 low notes in a row repeating in a constant cycle. What do you think of this mysterious story? If you could choose, what would you ask? Elias leave a comment I'd love to know. The strange sound Elias made did not change with his breathing. It seemed to come from deep in his throat, like a memory being recalled rather than a newly created word. On Saturday night, he placed the 2 diaries side by side on his desk. In one, under the page on anatomy, he wrote a note in the margin, "This one is a lie." In the other, next to the list of unfamiliar names, he added, "This one is the same." He did not elaborate. When asked, he just looked out the window and admitted that he had forgotten who he was playing. A lobby worker recounted a strange event not long after. At 3 a.m., the boy was seen leaning against the wall, his mouth slightly open, his right hand drawing small circles in the air. He said nothing until he was approached. Then he slowly turned around and whispered someone was watching his sleep. When asked who it was, he replied, "The silent one, the one who stays awake when I close my eyes." That morning, at his request, a mirror was placed on the bedside table. Elias gazed at it for several minutes, covering his right eye and then his left. When asked what he saw, he said that one of his eyes did not belong to him, and the mirror refused to tell him which eye, even though no one had asked it to. A footnote added by the attending physician in the margin of the page referred to the possibility of hemispheric independence. 2 minds existing in one body, divided not by imagination or will, but by biological structure. The hypothesis is not that the boy was broken, but that he was never whole. He was born with 2 loosely sewn together selves sharing a mouth but no memories. There was never any sign of pretense. In each state, he maintained consistency, but there was no overlap. When shown the events of the other state, he reacted like an outsider, sometimes curious, sometimes contemptuous, but never familiar. By the end of the observation period, the cycle of change between the 2 personalities became fixed, switching at dawn and dusk. Each personality reappeared as if there had never been a time gap, but subtle differences remained. On one occasion, both hands were seen writing at the same time. One hand drawing a human spine, the other writing down a meaningless series of numbers. When the pages were collected, neither matched his previous writing. The last note before concluding his observations shows him sitting quietly as the sun rose. He said nothing that morning. When asked how he felt, he replied slowly without emotion, "I think I'm starting to forget who I'm pretending to be." Then he turned away from the light. The notebook was discovered years later, warped by heat, but largely intact, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden behind a fake board in the former director of surgery's closet. The cover bore no markings, no name, no hospital seal, just a rough piece of black cowhide. The first few pages were fairly standard, with anatomical drawings copied from old books. But by page 12, things began to change. The writing was not altered by the strokes, but by the content. The drawings no longer followed convention. The notes move away from Latin into German, then into a mysterious script, sometimes an abbreviation, sometimes a personal code. The notes are inconsistent, like two minds working in succession. From reference, it moves into speculation, then into instructions. The drawings of the human brain show not lobes or nerves, but new divisions. Confession, denial, constraint, command. The arteries are unmarked. The corpus callosum. The central bridge between the two hemispheres is circled in red, the only color in the entire notebook. Around it, a circle and the untranslatable words, "The bridge is not a bridge." A faint hidden note imprinted on paper rather than in ink reveals that memories travel only one way through the corpus callosum and can be reversed if the flow is interrupted. On the next page, the bridge is renamed conduit. The middle of the notebook begins to show preparatory notes. What do you think of this? The bridge is not a bridge. Caption: Are we misunderstanding how the mind works? Can you guess what the doctor's intention is? Leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you think. The language of the notes gradually became more scientific, colder, less focused on healing, and more on calculated design. No patient names were recorded, but the measurements and entries matched exactly with the records of the boy Elias. One section of the document described the process of conditioning, interleaved stimulation, exposure reinforcement of a separate identity, repetition of a specialized task. This was not mere observation but deliberate preparation. The notes then confirmed the surgical plan, a midline craniotomy with no brain tissue removed, only separation. The instrument used was a cauterizing device to avoid unnecessary bleeding. The goal was clear: to isolate the two hemispheres, creating a state in which each side operated independently without interference from the other. Each ruled on its own without consensus. Amid these instructions, brief abstract sentences appeared. There was a repeated line: "He dreams only in the right hemisphere," and a note near the end of the draft procedure: "One of them is ready." A small slip of paper was inserted between two pages, written not in a surgeon's handwriting in light pencil ink, on brittle paper. The only message was "Stop cutting in the middle." No signature. Further entries were about auditory phenomena, reports that the boy was still humming, despite being partially sedated, a steady sliding melody that repeated every few seconds, not singing under his breath, but coming from somewhere deep inside. Staff present during the preliminary tests reported feeling mildly nauseous when the humming went on too long. One assistant even said the sound seemed to travel inside the walls. On the day of the surgery, the notes described the patient's position, the opening of the skull, and the first use of the heating wire. As soon as the knife touched the brain, the boy began to hum louder, even though his mouth was still closed. Witnesses said the sound was not a normal echo. It echoed unidirectionally, as if it were coming from the foundations of the building itself. Halfway through the operation, the boy opened one eye, his right eye. The observer noted that the iris had changed to a grayish-reddish color, dilated abnormally. The humming stopped and then resumed at a higher pitch. There was a note written in a different ink saying, "That part is hers." The surgical entry ended abruptly, with no notes about the wound closure or post-operative prognosis. The next page was just a rough drawing. Two overlapping hemispheres, now called archivist and witness, separated by a red crooked line. Below that was a new term not used in medicine, fractura linus internal fissure. The final page contained a musing. The writing, now fragmented, creeping into the margins, describes the change in the boy's behavior, not only in personality, but also in intention. One voice now begins at dawn, the other at dusk. They no longer intersect, each keeping its own time. The surgical goal has been achieved, but at the same time, a new awareness has been brought. The knife does not create a separation, it only exposes what was already there. What is bound is always two separate parts. The surgery only removes the compromise. The last lines in the notebook are partly burned, only readable in fragments. They speak of a new self, not whole, not in conflict, but doubled. One asks questions during the day and one answers only in dreams. Then there were no more pages. The pages were cracked. The paper curled with ash, a single bookmark, remaining a coarse, light brown strand of hair tucked under the last fold. Those who later studied the book found something strange. The two systems of abbreviations used throughout the document did not share a single symbol. Each set of notes followed its own structure, its own grammar, as if written, not by two hands, but by two minds, each fluent in a language the other had refused to learn. The notebook was kept in a protective lead case. When archivists tried to digitize it decades later, the scanner kept failing. In the middle of the page, no technical reason was ever found. The page could not be copied, a blank page with only a faded line of ink. He will never be made whole, because he was never made whole. No screams, just silence. And the hum. Don't you get chills when you hear about a knife that doesn't cut, but reveals a horrifying truth? Do you think Elias is the embodiment of an unusual entity? Or is he just a case of mad science? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments. And don't forget to like if you're already feeling chills down your spine. The operating room had not been used for a long time. The lights had been changed only a week earlier. The bed linens had been changed and the restraints had been thoroughly checked. A faint smell of alcohol and burning metal lingered in the corners, though no sterilization schedule had been recorded. The auxiliary operating room, which had not been listed on the staff list, had been locked all winter. But on the morning of February 14th, the door was found unlocked and the lights had been on. Elias was led into the room without resistance, his face calm and untroubled. He went without prompting, dressed in a standard hospital gown, carrying nothing. When asked if he understood what was about to happen, he simply nodded and, according to the records, said that only one of them would feel it. The anesthetic was administered carefully in stages, ethyl ether administered through cotton swabs. Observers noted that the heart rate remained steady, but the pupils did not dilate synchronously. The left remained fixed, the right blinked, and then stabilized. As the surgical drape was lifted, the boy opened both eyes just briefly and whispered something to the nurse who was directly monitoring him. The words were not recorded, but the nurse later remembered him saying, "The other one will take this part and I will stay." The operation began shortly after 5 a.m. The scalp was incised cleanly along the midline of the skull. The bones were easily separated. The meninges were exposed and separated. The two hemispheres of the brain appeared under the operating table, pale and quivering. The heating wire was heated and bent for precise manipulation. When it touched the first part of the corpus callosum, the bridge between the two hemispheres, the boy began to hum. The sound was low falling, consisting of 2 notes repeated at 5-second intervals. The sound did not change with the breath. It echoed even though his chest did not move. His lips remained closed, his jaw unstressed. The melody spread not in volume, but in an immeasurable presence. Everyone in the room felt as if there was a third observer, though no one else could see them. Midway through, the boy opened his right eye. The iris darkened, interspersed with gray and red. The humming continued. A nurse tried to write the melody down with her hand, but the pencil stopped mid-stroke. She said the rhythm kept repeating itself, coming back to the beginning. When she tried to write it down, as if the sound could not be molded or recorded. At the 12th minute, the boy spoke a sentence. His voice was flat, clear, but different from anything he had ever said before. According to the diary, the phrase had something to do with possession, something that belonged to her. Immediately, the hum rose an octave higher. There was no sign of pain, no scream or twitch. Yet, a slight vibration passed through the wire as it was pulled out. One of the assistants dropped the tool. His glove did not burn, but the skin underneath blistered within an hour. The boy's left hand rose once against the rope. The movement stopped mid-motion and then froze completely. The muscles did not twitch. The hand hung in the air for nearly 30 seconds and then slowly lowered without any further action. No stimuli were recorded. The surgery ended without stitches. The bleeding stopped spontaneously. The boy's eyes closed at the same time. How did you feel when you heard that moment? A child humming an inexplicable melody, a sound that seemed to come from the operating room itself, and unsolved mysteries. Is anyone feeling the creepiness creeping in? Comment below to let Sleepy History Tales know. Do you want to continue following Elias's mysterious journey? Or do you have any guesses about the meaning of the other person the boy was talking about? Share your feelings so we can explore together. The boy's mouth remained slightly open, as if he were mid-sentence. A black, almost inky smear appeared on his tongue, but tests found no blood or bile. Its composition was undetermined. The specimen taken later disappeared from the archives. 3 days later, a note appeared in the personal diary of the chief surgeon. It stated that the personality switches had now become regular, no longer overlapping. One ego appeared at dawn, the other at dusk. The two voices were distinctly different. Elias's was soft and reserved. The other sharper spoke of ownership time action, even the space they shared. When asked about the operation, Elias remembered only a white corridor. The other said nothing, only repeating that the bridge had been cut and that there would now be a toll. That evening, a wax cylinder was found attached to the wind chime. There was no label or schedule. The music began with a soft static, followed by a familiar two-note melody drawn out slowly. Then a voice spoke in a rare 19th century dialect, a lullaby, later determined to have originated in a village in Brandstorff that burned down in 1868. There was no recording of the song before 1894, and the boy had been born more than a decade after the village had disappeared. That same night, the caretaker of room 12 reported hearing a faint humming through the door. The boy stood motionless in front of the window. When asked who the melody was, for he opened one eye and replied simply, "So that the other person knows where I am." In the days that followed, new behaviors began to emerge. The hair on the left side of his head grows faster than the right side. The nails on his right hand were bitten and jagged, while the left was clean and trimmed. He wrote with both hands at the same time. The right hand wrote the same sentence over and over again, "I see you looking at me." The left hand more softly, "Please stop looking." No further surgeries were scheduled. The medical equipment was packed away. The diary was closed. But for the next 3 nights after the operating room was emptied, the humming continued, low, repetitive, always starting on time. 3 staff members reported hearing it echoing through the walls, but none dared stay long enough to hear it clearly. One later said the sound did not come from the room. It came from parts of the building that had never existed before. Elias's left hand did not recognize his right hand. Dawn came, he woke up. His hands neatly placed on his chest, and asked if it was Sunday. His eyes, both awake and dreamy, looked up at the ceiling as if reading something that others could not see. He asked for water, made the sign of the cross, drank, and returned the cup with both hands. When a nurse adjusted the mirror by the bed, he turned away, not out of shyness, but out of confusion. He said the mirror was unfamiliar, wondering if it could belong to someone else. His body was divided into 2. The left moved gracefully, the right stiff as if resisting an order he had never received. During the examination, his gait was slightly tilted. His left foot stepped confidently, his right foot followed cautiously as if afraid the floor would disappear. When he reached for the rosary beads placed by the bed, since pre-operative care, only his left hand reacted. His right hand remained limp. That afternoon, he read the Psalms with his left eye half closed, mumbling each verse in a slow rhythm. The chalkboard was clean. His voice was steady. The room was quiet. But by dusk, the mood had changed. The chalkboard, which had been blank now, had a series of squiggly symbols scribbled along the bottom edge. The profanity was in 3 languages, one of them Latin, in reverse. They were not present during the change of shifts. A nurse later confessed to hearing noises at dusk, a dragging sound on the floor, and something like a whisper of counting under the bed. When she entered the room, she found the boy lying on his side, facing the wall. A grey smudge of chalk dust was on his palm. The next morning, Elias returned to reading as if he had never written anything the night before. He denied having written anything. His right hand showed signs of a slight tremor when he was given a spoon to eat, but the food tray remained untouched. By midday, the behavior of the 2 hands began to diverge. The left hand obeyed commands, folding the bed, turning the pages of a book. The right hand became unstable, twitching involuntarily, sometimes clenching into a fist for no apparent reason. A doctor observed that the index finger of his right hand tapped the bed frame exactly 8 times, every 43 seconds. When his hands were tied, the tapping stopped, but his heart rate slowed and his eyes stared up at the ceiling, motionless for an hour. That night, a section of a prayer was found, carved upside down into the wooden floor beneath the bed. The marks were sharp as if made of wire or nails, some object not listed in the room list. The message was clear. He looks from the side and does not speak. Staff began to refer to the two personalities by informal nicknames. The daytime self, calm and devout, was called the left. The nighttime self, aggressive and unstable, was called the right. All reports emphasized that these were not simple mood swings. They were postures, behaviors, even physical reactions that were completely separated by time and, more worryingly, by light. In the light, the boy became restless. He stood by the window, his head tilted, as if listening to an echo through the glass. He wrote fragmented, chaotic phrases on the corner of the bedspread. Let the center rot. He was here before the light. The next morning, the writing had disappeared. Some rumored that the boy had erased it himself before the personality switch. Others thought the words were not meant for the same mind. On the third day, the mirror was returned. Elias approached slowly, his left eye squinting. When asked what he saw, he replied, "The mirror is missing someone." A nurse noted that the right side of his face twitched slightly, as if he was trying to suppress a grimace. That night, the mirror shattered. No banging noise, nothing moved. The crack ran diagonally from left to right, splitting the boy's mirrored face in two. Motor tests revealed further asymmetry. Left reflexes were intact. Right reflexes were slow or absent. When asked to draw a spiral with both hands, the left hand moved steadily. The right hand curled violently into an illegible knot. Several nurses asked to change shifts. Some complained of fatigue. Others felt nauseous near the ward at night, especially when the windows were open. One reported seeing the boy sitting in a corner, whispering into his closed right hand. When approached, he slowly opened his hand. It was empty inside. No aggressive behavior was recorded, but the sense of fear was increasingly evident. The right hand, once passive, now drew automatically in his sleep. They drew curved lines on the pillow, imitating the shape of the invisible object. Occasionally, they pointed to the ceiling as if counting fingers. Meanwhile, the left hand remained motionless. Fingers folded, palm open. On Saturday night, an employee discovered a chalkboard covered with symbols. Not letters but bisected circles. Some were open to the left, others to the right. The boy stood next to him motionless, one eye open, one closed, saying only one sentence. A man who learned to write in a dream. The chalk was no longer in the room, but the marks reappeared on clothwood leather. Faint sketches on the soles of the feet made of ash or dust spiraled in opposite directions. No one claimed responsibility. The source of the ash and dust was not found. The doctors agreed that the operation had been a success, if only mechanically. The two minds had separated, but something else invisible had followed. Something neither acknowledged but both submitted to. They were no longer just two alternating states. They were coexisting, and in the deadest hours of the night, between the faint pulses of moonlight and the first breath of wind, some of the staff swore they heard two voices speaking at once, not speaking to each other, but speaking to something entirely different. A letter had been sent, neither admitted to having written it. It had been placed on Dr. Brenner's desk at the change of shifts. A single letter without envelope or signature was placed under the heavy brass spine. The writing was delicate, even, and marked with the imprint of the left hand. The writer thanked Dr. Brenner for the separation that had brought clarity. The silence had been unbearable, and now the voices no longer clashed. But at the end of the letter was a warning. Do not talk to him. He lies. The letter was burned that same evening, but it was not the last. The letters continued to appear mysteriously, each found in the most unlikely of places under the mattress, behind a wall lamp rolled up in a syringe. The content varied from thoughtful and poetic to decisive and vague, even full of events that interrupted and repeated sentences like, "He did not blink when I blinked." The staff discovered two distinct handwriting styles. The left hand was elegant and controlled. The right hand was bumpy and uneven. The letters were like exchanges between two halves of the mind, with warnings, apologies, arguments, but never at the same time. The dayman wrote like a prayer, sometimes addressed directly to the other. The nightman gradually took on a name, Lucas. There was no previous record of the name, but it echoed, whispered in his sleep in a different voice. Older letters were found, perhaps from before the boy arrived. They told of a child who could not sleep unless both eyes were covered. 3 were signed Lucas. A nurse heard the boy speaking in 2 voices at once, not alternating, but overlapping, as if arguing with himself. Mirrors removed from the room, Dr. Brenner's notes dwindled, leaving only haunting questions about how many souls could inhabit a skull before doors were forgotten. An unsigned letter bluntly asserted that Lucas had been conscious longer than anyone had thought, waiting silently as Elias performed the usual rituals, not created but allowed to appear. The denouement was reproachful. You named him. That's how you made him real. The next day, the boy faced the wall silently, one hand clenched, the other shaking. When he was given a pencil, he wrote a single word: home, no address, no memory. The next night, Brenner's desk drawer opened, and inside was the last letter, Lucas's handwriting, but different. A steady rhythm, neither poetry nor prayer, saying that the other was beginning to remember, that the boy had seen something in a dream, something that neither of them could explain, and that their thoughts were beginning to mix even during the day. The final line of the last note read, "If he learns my name again, I will not go back." The drawer was quietly relocked and the note destroyed. Yet, in the stillest hours of the ward, when oil lamps flickered faintly against cold iron fixtures, the nurses still whispered of strange sounds: paper shifting softly, the faint scrape of graphite, the hush of a pencil dragging slowly across cloth. Letters were still being written, but not for others to read, only to be found. One morning, shortly before the noon watch, the boy drew a map in blood. Not the clinic's current layout, but something far older, far darker. Elias had spent the day in quiet calm, seated by the window, his left hand resting peacefully in his lap, eyes tracing the drifting clouds beyond the west wall. He declined breakfast, but accepted communion, whispering a blessing over the wafer before consuming it with no sign of distress. The shift was uneventful until the nurse returned to find the room altered. The linens were stripped from the bed and arranged in a precise spiral on the floor. In its center sat the boy barefoot, his smock soaked through the sleeve. In his right hand was a shard of glass, confirmed later to be from the broken pane behind his cot, shattered cleanly at one corner without sound or alarm. The shard had been used to slice the inner palm beneath his thumb. Not deep, but exact. Dark, slow-moving blood was smeared in arcs across the floorboards. At first, the stains seemed random lines and cross-sections with no clear meaning. But as the physician studied them, a structure emerged. The blood traced a map, one not matching the clinic's present design. It depicted hallways long sealed off since an 1871 fire. Rooms marked with cryptic symbols, one a spiral, another a triangle bisected by a vertical line. Most unsettling was a small inset. Near the lower margin, a staircase descending beneath the foundation, an unrecorded, undocumented sublevel. It led to a chamber, marked only by a handprint. When asked, the boy offered no explanation. He simply turned away, muttering a phrase no one could decipher. It was later identified in the recovered letters Rückweg, a term roughly meaning the way back, but in archaic Prussian implying a return from the dead. Though treated and cleaned, the boy's wound refused to heal. The skin around the cut remained unnervingly cold, as if the blood beneath no longer obeyed the body. At night, the hand moved on its own, scratching the sheets, pressing against walls. Once in sleep, it reached up to hold his lips shut for half a minute before retreating. The floorboards were scrubbed, the blood erased, but faint stains remained visible only when the light struck, just so as if the wood itself had absorbed the pattern. The spiral returned every few days, regardless of cleaning. Old architectural plans partially confirmed the map. A long bricked hallway once led to a rear stairwell, but no records described any sub-level chambers, expansions, or permits. The clinic's founding charter made no mention of such a place. Meanwhile, a nurse on the east wing began hearing strange echoes, footsteps turning before hall-ins, distant grinding of stone against metal, and a single knock beneath flagstones in the bathing room just before dawn. Though the original map was destroyed, its shape was recreated not with ink or chalk, but in the arrangement of the boy's surroundings. He began shifting furniture, tilting his cot slightly, pushing the desk at an unnatural angle. Viewed from above, the room's layout matched the blood-drawn map perfectly. The cot rested where the spiral had been traced in blood. The desk stood where the handprint had marked the hidden chamber. The boy no longer spoke during daylight hours. At night, he whispered to a mirror long since removed from the room. An orderly once claimed to see him crawling across the floor in the hours before dawn, tracing strange shapes with his unbandaged right hand. When confronted, he returned to bed without resistance, but faint spiral lines remained on the floor, new patterns subtly shifting. One seemed to spiral inward as if in motion. Dr. Breener's final note was brief and enigmatic. The incision had not been exploratory, but a signal, a map drawn by one who already knew the way. The wound, he suggested, had not been made to escape, but to return. Shortly after, during a routine inspection, a brick wall in the disused west stairwell unexpectedly collapsed. Behind it lay a narrow corridor lined with scorched stone descending 3 steps before ending abruptly at a blank wall. No chamber was found, only a smear of dried soot in the shape of an open hand. The wall was quickly sealed again, but those who stepped inside reported vertigo at the last step, not a simple dizziness, but a sensation of movement as if the entire quarter had shifted overnight. Beneath the forgotten foundations, something had begun to hum. The voice captured on the wax cylinder was not the boy's, it was a man's voice, trembling with grief and weeping. The photograph accompanying it was not standard clinic equipment, but brought in unofficially at Dr. Brenner's insistence. His handwriting had grown erratic in recent weeks, sentences trailing into indecipherable scribbles. He complained that the boys' voices shifted too often, that what was spoken at dawn contradicted the whispers at dusk. He needed a stable record mechanical proof. The first cylinder marked only Session 1 began with familiar static. The needle's scratch. Then the boy's voice quiet. Nasal, identifying himself with name and date. Minutes later the tone dropped. The phrasing warped syllables stretched as if translating from a language lost to time. Fragmented phrases followed names, places a garden, long gone, a fire no one recalled. Toward the recording's end, a third name was uttered, not Elias or Lucas, but a surname matching Dr. Brenner's son who had drowned 5 years prior in the winter thaw. His body never recovered. A deep, cracked male voice wept for nearly 20 seconds before the recording ended with a harsh scratch. It was played 3 times before being locked away. The second session revealed a new anomaly. The boy spoke in archaic Prussian, not just accented German, but a rigid, inverted dialect unused for nearly a century. No one on staff could translate it. Weeks later, a visiting philologist confirmed its authenticity, insisting such fluency would require years of immersion, impossible for a child with no known exposure. This recording was more structured, a string of statements, perhaps confessions, references to rooms missing from the current building, and to long-deceased individuals. At one point, the speaker used a term for a keeper of locks last seen in municipal texts from the 16th century. Most unsettling were the faint background sounds, whispers layered in counter-rhythm, weaving backward and forward through time played in reverse. They offered no clear words, only the shapes of language, like half-remembered prayers from a forgotten childhood. A technician described the experience as hearing his own childhood prayers spoken through another's mouth. By the third recording, the boy's identity fractured further. Each hour-long session revealed a different voice, one clipped, and instructional reciting numbers, architectural measurements and events dated in the future. Another, melancholic, questioning its own existence and whether it had ever truly lived. A third spoke only in questions, while a fourth repeated over and over. This one is watching each time with a shifting inflection. The only consistent presence across every recording was the weeping man. He appeared briefly each time, not at the beginning, never at the end, but always in the middle, always weeping. Staff tasked with transcribing the tapes soon began requesting reassignment. One clerk complained of persistent headaches despite no diagnosed infection. Another confessed he no longer recognized his own voice when speaking aloud. A nurse assigned to oversee the recordings fainted during playback, and upon awakening, claimed she had seen a stairwell where none existed, one that twisted endlessly, floor upon floor. Dr. Breener's journal soon reflected a profound shift. No longer did he write about hemispheres or fractured behavior. Instead, he spoke of permeability, consciousness not singular or sealed but porous. Elias had not split into parts. He had opened like a wound, and from that wound, something had entered, or more precisely returned. The seventh and final recording was never played in full. Only a fragment remained, a single incomplete sentence followed by the strike of a match and the hiss of burning wax. The fragment suggested the speaker was no longer aware of the clinic or time the sentence ended mid-thought, with a reference to September despite it being February. The recording equipment was removed, the cylinders locked away. Within weeks, their entire case file vanished from the archives. No inventory existed, no requisition forms, only the fading echo of voices once etched in wax. Years later, during renovations of the old surgical wing, a wax cylinder was found, lodged behind the foundation stones. It bore no label. When carefully restored and played, it revealed no speech, only a series of slow, steady taps, 8 seconds apart, perfectly matching the boy's recorded heart rate on the night of his final session. Between the taps, distant weeping could still be heard. In the last seconds before the needle scraped silence, a whisper spoke a name. Not Elias's, not any doctor's, a name never uttered aloud in the clinic, yet somehow known by the walls, bound in human skin and stamped with a seal unused since 1786. The ledger was discovered beneath the floorboards in room 12, sealed flat between joists and wrapped in oilcloth. Brittle with age, its reveal was accidental. A mislaid step during a midnight round caused the plank to snap, releasing not just the volume, but a thin, dustless air as if untouched by time. The cloth unraveled with a crackle, like dried leaves. Its cover was dark and impossibly smooth, etched faintly with the twin-headed bird wings encircling a crown of thorns. Archivists confirmed the insignia belonged to a short-lived Prussian medical society, disbanded in disgrace over a century prior. Its final charter was dated precisely to spring 1786, with no successor ever claiming the symbol. The first page bore no title or name, only a date, scratched not in ink, but some dull, dark residue, 1873, nearly 2 decades before Elias's birth. What followed defied formal logic. The pages were written in a hand hauntingly familiar to those who had transcribed the boy's notes, precise, measured, sometimes hurried, but always legible. It began with observations: the smell of the clinic walls after rain, the way light shifted through the eastern corridor when shutters were opened, details matching the architecture before its first renovation down to oil lamp. Fixtures no longer present, but the entries went deeper. Entire passages recounted conversations between the original clinic staff, some of whom had perished in the 1871 fire. Their words were reproduced with eerie accuracy and emotional weight, as if witnessed firsthand. Long-abandoned treatment calls were recalled in perfect detail, matching surviving procedural texts. These were not copied entries, they were remembered. Yet Elias had never seen these texts, nor had he been told these histories. Over time, the voice of the ledger shifted, growing darker, more fragmented, a slow descent into something unnameable. The early chapters were written with reverence, almost awe. Observations gave way to reflection, as if the author was slowly unveiling a hidden truth. But the tone darkened as the book progressed, fixated on repetition echoes and the unsettling concept of folded time. A phrase began to recur, always lowercase: always surrounded by silence in the text, as if the words themselves needed space to resonate the middle hour. One entry described a door removed after the western annex was condemned. It spoke of a latch that turned inward against the grain of the frame, revealing a staircase absent from every blueprint. An unnamed physician had once descended, returning changed, walking slower, blinking less, writing pages he later claimed to not remember. No official record ever documented this staircase. Toward the book's center, one chapter recounted the arrival of a boy with two minds. But this was not Elias. He bore no name, only the initials KB, and was described not as a patient, but as a visitor. The writer observed the boy speaking to walls not yet built. At one point, those initials reappeared faintly traced in the corner of a page, as though someone or something had tried and failed to erase them. The most chilling entries were dated to 1892 sometimes, days, sometimes mere hours before the events occurred. A nurse later injured in a fall was mentioned, the night before her accident, in unnerving detail. The exact placement of an oil lamp that had failed was noted. A storm that struck the east wall on September 7th, described 3 days in advance, including a faint metallic scent in the rain. Cross-checked against the clinic's weather logs, the descriptions matched with uncomfortable precision. Even more troubling were notes referencing people outside the clinic, a merchant's child who would later contract scarlet fever, a letter received by a distant relative of a staff member, described before its arrival. The journal did not predict. It recounted in past tense events that had not yet transpired. Eventually, the writing grew fragmented, as if penned during waking dreams. One page contained a single phrase, repeated dozens of times. I hear them walking on the floor above me, but the ceiling hasn't been built. Another read. Lucas has started using the wrong hand again. He knows it makes me dizzy. Followed by, he says, that means it's working. Nowhere in the journal was the name Elias used. Only the alternating voices, the one who observed, the one who interrupted, and eventually, the one who spoke through both. In the final pages, a passage described a ledger, bound in skin, hidden beneath the floor, waiting to be found by the one who would one day forget he had written it. The ink on that last line appeared fresher, still damp to the touch. Dr. Brenner read the journal in its entirety within 48 hours. Afterward, his notes changed. The rigor and clarity gave way to symbols, unfinished phrases, and open questions. In the margin of a patient chart, he scribbled, "The boy may not be the vessel." Below it, in a different hand, possibly his own but reversed, was the question. Then, what is he carrying? The ledger was hidden once more, not beneath floorboards this time, but deep within the east wing's walls, inside a narrow cavity behind plaster. The cavity was shaped like a human torso, as if the wall had once accepted a body. The void was sealed, but before that, presumably Brenner added one final note to the last page. "If I find this again, it means I've remembered the wrong life." The page beneath was blank, but not clean, just waiting. Desperation led them to try to rejoin the hemispheres. One side fought back. The reversal procedure was unauthorized by the board, performed clandestinely under dim lamplight during the quiet hours between midnight and dawn rounds. No formal notes were submitted, no surgical orders logged. The only record survives as a single hurried sentence in the margin of a private chart. "I believe I can undo the cut." The plan was simple. In theory, reconnect what had been severed stimulate the corpus callosum with localized current, encourage the two hemispheres to communicate again through regrowth or adaptation. But it was speculative at best, desperate at worst. The boy was prepped without incident. Anesthesia was administered, but only partially. His left side remained motionless, compliant. The right side, however, reacted abnormally. Before the second needle could be placed, the muscles of the right arm contracted in violent spasms. The hand clawed at the air, not toward the instruments, but toward the attending physician's face. No words escaped, yet the mouth formed a repeated shape. Observers claimed it resembled the pronunciation of a name, one unfamiliar to them and one the doctor refused to say aloud. Despite this, the procedure continued. Contact was made with the exposed neural tissue. At first, no resistance was noted. The boy's vitals held steady. But midway through stimulation of the anterior commissure, the left eye opened calm, lucid, while the right remained clenched, flickering like it was caught in REM sleep. Within moments, the boy's right leg began to jerk rhythmically, pounding against the gurney frame with growing force until restraints were applied. No sound came from the boy. None until the instrument reached the interhemispheric junction. Then came the scream. It was not the boy's voice. It echoed sharply and immediately, originating somewhere deep within the clinic's lower levels. The timing was exact. The scream rose with the first electrical pulse and ceased only when the current stopped. The next day, at the precise same hour, the scream returned. No patients were present. No staff had entered the wing. It repeated every 24 hours, lasting exactly 12 seconds, always beginning on the same minute, always coming from the same direction downward. Further attempts at reintegration failed. The brain responded unpredictably. The right hemisphere resisted stimuli even under sedation. Pupillary reflexes conflicted. The right ear registered sounds hours before the left. A nurse witnessed the boy writing messages with his right hand, while the left hand attempted to erase them. When asked what they meant, the boy whispered, "He doesn't want to go back." 3 days later, the surgical wound reopened without trauma. Sutures held dressing intact, yet when the bandages were removed, the skin had separated along a perfect line mirroring the original incision. No blood appeared. The exposed bone beneath looked altered, not in color or shape, but in texture, porous, as if the skull itself had begun mimicking the fragile inner ear. More disturbing was the change in the boy's behavioral rhythm. The two identities no longer alternated by day and night, but switched in response to environmental triggers. Flames flickering, water dripping, the word return, spoken aloud. Shifts sometimes lasted seconds, other times hours. During evening prayers, the boy recited a passage in a language none could identify, a regional dialect of Old Sorbian, last recorded in the 17th century. By week's end, the scream spread. Staff in the West Wing reported hearing the same 12-second scream at staggered intervals, one voice then another, 6 times in a single night. Each scream separated by exactly 144 minutes, the division of a day into 10 equal parts. An old failed calendar chart from storage matched the sequence perfectly. One orderly tried recording the scream on a wax cylinder. Playback revealed no scream, only silence. Yet, during recording, the phonograph needle carved a spiral into the wax, concentric and consistent matching the marks found beneath the boy's bed. That same night, the boy began writing and drawing again, this time on his own skin. Symbols repeated from earlier notes, circles intersected by slashes, upside-down crosses inside triangles, spirals ending in jagged breaks. The drawings covered his arms, chest, even the soles of his feet. Attempts to wash them off failed. The ink bled into his skin, staining it a ghostly grey. By the week's close, the left side of his face began to slacken. The muscles on the left side of his face refused to obey commands. His eye wept without cause tears, spilling silently. Yet, when asked how he felt, the boy answered with the right side of his mouth, a faint, almost knowing smile. He remained silent for hours. Then, just before nightfall, he slowly turned his head toward the sealed stairwell and whispered a final fractured sentence, only partially transcribed. "It was not me you opened." After that, the spasms ceased. The identity shifts became less frequent, but the screams persisted, echoing nightly at the same precise hour. And deep below the rusted gate behind the bricked-off wall, something began knocking softly once every 12 seconds. No bodies were found. Only a melted clock, its hands still ticking. The fire ignited at 3:01 a.m., though the first visible flames weren't reported until nearly 15 minutes later. By then, the eastern stairwell had collapsed and the surgical wing was engulfed. Villagers miles away described the glow visible over 4 kilometers as a pillar of smoke, rising unnaturally straight into the sky, as if tethered to something beyond the clouds. The official report blamed a gas leak, a faulty pipe beneath the lower ward, likely ignited by a careless oil lamp or match. But no evidence of a leak was ever found. Maintenance logs made no mention of malfunctions. Curiously, the storage room containing all flammable materials was untouched. No broken vials, no scorched cabinets. The fire behaved with intent. Survivors described heat without flame rooms, freezing cold while adjacent chambers boiled. Windows that should have shattered remained intact. A metal door sealed decades ago was later found, warped inward as if pressed gently from the other side. Not by force, but by presence. And yet, no bodies were recovered. 23 patients, 9 staff, all presumed dead, none found. When the rubble was cleared, little remained but charred beams and twisted pipes. In the center of what was once the examination theater stood a desk upright, blackened but unburned. Atop it sat a brass clock, its glass bubbled and opaque, still ticking. The hands were frozen at 3:01, the exact minute the clinic was last whole. A baker's apprentice heading to start the ovens before dawn claimed to have seen a figure walking calmly from the grounds just as the flames breached the roofline. The boy, barefoot and uninjured, walked steadily, his smock scorched at the hem but otherwise intact. He never looked back. The apprentice recalled the boy's eyes as the most unsettling feature, one pale grey, almost colorless and glazed as if blind. The other dark, deep as rain-soaked earth. They moved independently, not erratically, but as if observing two separate worlds simultaneously. When the boy's gaze fell upon the apprentice, only the dark eye shifted. The grey remained fixed on something unseen, something behind him. When asked if the boy spoke, the apprentice hesitated, then said he mouthed a single word silently, the name of a city that no longer existed. Among the ashes, a few objects survived: a set of bone-handled surgical tools, unblackened despite the fire. a child's charcoal drawing of a never-ending staircase descending into the earth, and a page torn from a journal fused to the wall by melted varnish. It read, "The hemispheres did not separate. They relocated." Dr. Brainer's name was nowhere to be found in the fire's aftermath. No body, no witnesses, no personal effects. His home was undisturbed, a half-eaten meal. His coat hung neatly, his surgical case open beneath the desk. Yet the final pages of his private journal were missing, and an ink bottle lay shattered across the floor. The mirror in his study was cracked, not shattered, but split clean down the center, each half reflecting only a portion of the room. In later years, rumors spread of a traveling physician who moved silently between villages, always arriving shortly after a child's sudden collapse. He bore no credentials, traveled alone, and left before morning began. Some said he carried a small notebook wrapped in cloth. Others insisted it was bound in human skin bare and unadorned. The new clinic building was leveled within the year, erased from memory, as thoroughly as the secrets it held. The land was sold to a private firm that planned to build a sanatorium for war victims. But the project was abandoned after a series of strange accidents. Tools vanished inexplicably, foundations cracked without cause, workers refused to stay past dusk. Then a second fire consumed the scaffolding during construction. Like the first, this place had no recorded origin. Today nothing stands on the grounds, only moss and frost remain. But those who dare trespass after dark report hearing a faint ticking beneath the soil, not mechanical, not loud, but persistent. Always from the same direction, just beyond where the eastern stairwell once descended into the lower ward. That stairwell was never rebuilt. The earth shifted after the fire and records of the original layout were lost. Yet some say the door still waits. Once every year on the fire's anniversary, the boy returns, not walking this time, but waiting. As if for someone who has not yet arrived, someone still deciding which mind to keep. A letter surfaced, handwriting, matching letters sent from Argentina in 1931. The envelope bore no postage, sealed with wax, stamped in an unrecognizable crest. The paper was unevenly yellowed-aged or perhaps exposed to something unclassifiable. It was addressed not to a person but to a long-forgotten title, Curator of Anomalous Archives, 4th Registry, Koigsberg. There had been no 4th registry since 1895. The letter's contents were penned in alternating hands, one narrow, slanted, precise, the other wide, loose, prone to sudden elevation midline. The ink darkened and faded unpredictably, as if composed under different light or across vast stretches of time. It referenced buried events from older records, clinical protocols abandoned before the Great War, a patient whose eyes never aligned in photographs, fragments of a lullaby roughly translated from Low Sorbian, the extinct language the boy once sang during his first incision. Elias was never named directly. Instead, the letter spoke of the divided one and later the child who dreamt with 2 mirrors. The voice shifted mid-paragraph, sometimes mid-sentence. One personality, clinical and focused, the other, meandering, obsessed with memories misaligned with history ships that never launched buildings. With no foundation, a mother's face recalled only through another's eyes. One line described the old new house clinic, with such detail including mention of a 4th stair that creaked despite being made of stone, that internal investigations reopened. But it was the final paragraph that alarmed most. It began in Latin, then fractured German, then an elegant, unfamiliar dialect. The closing sentence was chillingly clear. It seemed the ledger was not destroyed, only rebound, and the hands that write it now belong to no one. A comparison was later made with a letter found decades earlier, mailed from Buenos Aires in the spring of 1931. That letter, locked under restricted access, had long been dismissed as apocryphal. It bore the same dual handwriting, referenced a room beneath a sanatorium never completed, and described a dream where every voice echoed except one which whispered forward into the listener's mouth. Forensic analysis confirmed the match. Though separated by nearly 40 years and half a world, both letters were penned by the same hand. An even stranger anomaly appeared under filtered light. The darker handwriting refracted faint notations, dates mostly. Each corresponded to deaths recorded across European clinics, hospitals, and sanatoriums. None were formally linked yet. In every case, the deceased had been described in their final hours as smiling with only one side of their face. Of those institutions, 3 no longer exist. 2 of the institutions were consumed by fire. 1 was buried beneath a failed dam project. Each collapse occurred on the same day of the calendar year, March 17th. The archivist assigned to the case after compiling these eerie correlations began experiencing disturbing visions and altered perceptions. He described hearing whispers emanating from sealed chambers and at one point witnessing his own handwriting appear on a blank page, though he had no memory of writing it. Soon after submitting his transcript, he resigned. The letter was resealed and locked away. But days later, an identical copy arrived, except the address was changed. This time it was not directed to any institution, but to a name, that of the current narrator, the one compiling these files, the one who had never revealed their identity. The letter was folded precisely, bearing no stamps or creases. A postscript had been added beneath the signature. I was always listening. I just needed a voice to write me down. The ink had not dried. When touched, it smudged, not like fresh ink, but something alive, resisting stillness. Later that very evening, a fire broke out in the nearby records annex. No casualties, minor damage, but among the destroyed boxes was a ledger of visitor entries from 1892. The final signature, though now lost, was reported by a clerk as reading, Lucas, return. That same night, footsteps echoed in the stairwell, descending, measured, rhythmic, not hurried, not heavy, but as if each step belonged to a different mind. We cannot confirm Elias was ever real, but neither can we deny him. The final assessment was filed under restricted protocol assigned no public reference number. The incident was deemed closed. All surviving materials were transferred to a sealed archive beneath the Federal Registry with the recommendation of non-reinstatement under Clause 72B, anomalous psychological contamination. Subsequent inquiries were to be denied by default. The file contains no photographs, no birth certificate, no documented parentage. The patient record for Elias is preserved only as a copy, handwritten, unsigned. The ink has faded unevenly, as if exposed to heat, though storage conditions remained constant. Adjacent folders show no such fading. A formal request was made to expunge the name New House Clinic from official medical registries. The request was granted. The institution no longer appears in state-funded directories from 1890 onward. Its staff were traceable, left no descendants, or relocated under assumed names. One death certificate lists cause of death as identity fatigue. The physician assigned later recanted the term, stating he no longer trusted his own handwriting. The site itself remains undeveloped. A low depression marks where east and west wings once stood. Birds avoid the area. Moss grows in unnatural symmetry, concentric rings echoing something buried beneath the soil. Surveyors who visited noted subtle auditory distortions, wind arriving seconds before movement. Others reported hearing two sets of footsteps, one forward, one faintly delayed. Of the boy, nothing conclusive remains. No birth records, no official placement or disappearance documented. Testimonies vary. Some describe him pale and stoic, others dark and volatile. A few place him at the edge of unrelated historical incidents, always unclaimed, always silent. One archivist charted sightings across a calendar. Each fell on March 17th. Hospitals across 3 countries retain records of a child admitted on that date annually. Never the same facility twice, but always within the region once governed by the former Prussian medical jurisdiction. Admissions describe a boy aged 9 to 11. No wounds, no speech, often barefoot. No 2 cases share identical fingerprints. Yet each description ends with nearly the same phrase, he seems halved. In every case, the child is discharged after 24 hours without a formal guardian. Staff cannot recall who authorized release. Available footage shows the boy walking toward a mirror or window and vanishing before the next frame. Attempts to connect these visits to known historical figures have failed. DNA samples, when submitted, corrupted upon extraction. One analyst described the sample as turning inward when asked to clarify. She refused. The last known correspondence arrived not by post, but slipped beneath the door of a records annex in Vienna. No envelope, just a single folded page. Its ink mirrored the dual-handed pattern seen in earlier artifacts. 2 styles, 1 message. You may file him away, but I still dream. Both sides. The note was unsigned. No fingerprints. The custodian on duty resigned the same evening. When asked why, he simply said, I saw my name written in the future. All further inquiry was halted. To open this file again requires signatures from 2 separate departments. Neither exists now. The seals remain intact. The registry has been erased from all public indexes. And yet, without fail, every year a courier arrives. No identification, no request for entry. He delivers a small, unmarked envelope. Inside, a single drawing. Always the same. A boy split down the middle, one half clutching a book, the other holding a key. Behind him, barely visible in the shadowed space where the 2 halves do not touch, something watching. Or perhaps remembering. Not all ledgers close. Some continue beneath the page and in places forgotten by time, still waiting for someone to read them aloud.